All right, Coach Sav here, and welcome to a quick intro to triathlon, specifically catered for those who are jumping into their very first triathlon and don't know where the heck to start. So first things first, when you're looking at your training, it should resemble the look of your race, with the least amount of time spent in the swim and the most amount of time spent on the bike. If I only had 10 hours a week, which obviously wouldn't be a great amount of time if I was training for a half or even a full Ironman, but still might be where you're starting, I would look at a minimum of 2 hours in the swim, 3 hours in the run, and 5 hours on the bike. Now, my face is blocking it here, but shorter swims, more frequent, is going to be the money. I would say about 4 days a week, and you're in there for about 30 minutes each. So nice, quick, intentional sets. Moving into the run, you're going to have your brick sessions. Treat those as your tempo. You got about 30 minutes, so anywhere from 15 to 30 minutes right off the bike. Track sessions, these are your high aerobic. They need to be 1 hour or less, very curated again. And your long run, zone 2, looking for about an hour and a half. The standard procedure in triathlon training is one session in each discipline that's under 60 minutes, full intensity, and excluding the swim, you want one session in the run and the bike that is over 90 minutes of just zone 2. That's how you build that aerobic engine, that endurance base. In the bike, you're going to be looking at about your long zone 2 rides should be hovering in that 2-hour category. Climbs, if relevant, know your course, know where you're racing, what's the terrain. Look at about a 45-minute session there. Intervals, this is where we're spiking our heart rate, bringing it back down, spiking our heart rate and bringing it back down. Look at about an hour and a half dedicated to that. And then weakness work. This is something so many cyclists, athletes in general, tend to neglect. If you know there's something you suck at doing on the bike, dedicate at least 45 minutes every single week to targeting that. If you suck on the climbs, if you suck in descents, if you aren't great at handling your bike, zero in on that, pay some attention. What we don't want is compensating training, so just focus on it. Now you'll notice a trend in triathletes. We tend to focus on our heart rate a lot and time a lot. And we kind of ignore speed, and we definitely ignore distance. So we've got the zones. Again, I'm kind of covering zones 4 and 5. You're going to be spending most of your time in zone 2, that aerobic base. It should be 81 to 89% of that max heart rate. Oh, sorry, that lactate threshold heart rate, not your max heart rate. That's very different. These numbers would look a lot different. What is that lactic threshold heart rate, the LTHR? Well, that is essentially the heart rate that you can hold when the lactate begins to pool, because eventually what happens is when we're in an aerobic pace, lactate's pooling into our blood, but we're successfully flushing it out. Lactic threshold heart rate is where there's more coming in than we're able to pool out. So we actually flush out. So we begin to pool lactic. That has a massive impact on our pace. Our legs begin to feel tired. They begin to feel heavy. So that's what we're measuring this percentage to. Now, as a general rule of thumb, there should never be more than a 10% increase every single week. And every 3 weeks, have a deload, have a recovery week, bring that number down, let your body adapt, catch up, and get back into the zone. One thing to note is it is very difficult to increase the duration of your workouts and the intensity. So you often have to choose one at a time and focus in on it. There can be a seasonal shift for that. So typically people do their long stuff over the winters and then they spice in their intensity in the spring, where you can do it as 1 week is more duration focused, 1 week is more intensity focused. You kind of can split it up however you want. But as a general rule of thumb, if you're trying to increase 10% every single week, you're going to burn out. It's a crazy number. Don't do it. 2% is more of a better place to hang out. But again, very individualistic, so it's hard to make general statements. Now, 90% of your training, this is the Norwegian training method, zone 2. So this is an easy conversational pace. And you should be feeling fatigued, not from a singular workout, but from the stacking, the accumulation of one workout after the other. So the goal here is to make the easy workouts easy, super easy, easier than you thought they should be, and make the hard workouts super hard, make them harder than you thought they could be. And if you can follow that and you can hang out in those two areas, really hard, really easy, you're building both the foundation and also the towers that go up. I mean, it's a phenomenal way to train. Now, if you're curious on what your lactate threshold heart rate is. There's a simple test you can do. Obviously, you can get this more thoroughly examined. It's similar to a VO2 max test where you would go into an actual facility. But it's a little bit different than a VO2 max. We're not necessarily measuring where our max capacity of oxygen is, but rather what is the max heart rate that we can hold for the longest period of time. So how it works, you're going to warm up for 15 minutes. You do a 30-minute all-out effort. You can do this on a bike or a run. And then you're going to press lap on your watch at the 10-minute mark. And your average heart rate for the final 20 minutes is your LTA chart. So that's just a simple test that you can do. I recommend having that data. It's a very powerful source to be able to build your workouts off and kind of figure out your pacing, your strategies, etc. Now let's go into bikes, choosing a bike. If you are in between two sizes, say you've been recommended a 51 or a 52, I always say stick with smaller. Typically it's more comfortable. People feel like they have a lot more control, and especially if this is going to be one of your first bikes that you have, I think you'll enjoy it a lot more. Personal preference, but I do think it works for most folks. Now just remember, a really key point to note is that you're measuring your inseam, shoulder to hip. So this is different than your actual overall height. You might put in your height to Google and it says, oh, perfect, you are size 54. You grab a 54 bike and you feel like you are cranked forward. Part of the reason for that is because you might have a really, really short torso, just really long legs. Now it's easy to obviously raise your seat, but it's hard to kind of pull in the bars. Obviously you can adjust the stem size, but it's a lot harder to deal with some of those components on the bike. So make sure you're measuring your inseam. That should give you a more accurate feel for what size of a bike you should get. Now, what to look for, you're purchasing your bike. If you're buying used, which I highly recommend because one, bikes depreciate so much, they're insanely priced. Especially since 2020, they've just been through the roof. And you can get amazing deals. And also, a lot of the value from the bike comes from the components that you put on. And the more custom those components are, the better. So if you buy a super nice bike, you're buying all brand new components, and you might want to swap those out anyways. So what's the point? I recommend buy a really great frame. And as you get better, as you get more involved in the sport, you can add it up a little bit. But here's where I'd go. So if you're grabbing a carbon bike, which I highly recommend, try the coin tap. This is essentially where you go around and you're checking for cracks, because cracks in carbon are not always visible and they are extremely dangerous to have because they just explode. So if you have a carbon, just grab a coin, tap around the frame. If you ever hear a thud instead of kind of like a chamber, like a hollow sound, that could be an indicator of a crack. You might want to investigate that further, or in my opinion, just don't buy it. 2, the bottom brackets, the BB, so the pedal spin. If you hear a ton of creaking or there's just like it doesn't feel smooth when you're moving that, this can be quite a lengthy process to fix with a high torque tool to press it all out. So it can be quite an expensive process. I recommend just trying to find a bike that has really good bottom bracket components. Your chain ring, so you're looking for sharper teeth. And again, if there's like a ton of gunk and a ton of stuff that's accumulated over that, it could just be someone's, hygiene of their bike. It doesn't necessarily mean the overall care and maintenance of it. But hygiene is typically an indicator of how well they've done those other things. So personally, I'm always looking for sharp teeth. That tells me that they've been replacing components as they wear out. Also tells me how hard they ride their bike. So again, it's not the end of the world. These are things that any bike is going to have to be updated with time, but just proceed with caution. And finally, the cable routing, so gearing. This can be like quite expensive and a little bit of a complicated process. So it's not the end of the world because again, this is like regular wear and tear on your bike, but just be mindful of it and the price. This can be a really good place to like kind of use some negotiation. So basic bike maintenance, obviously, you want to be degreasing your bike as well. So grease just allows a lot of soil and dust and dirt and rocks and stuff to kind of stick to your bike. So make sure you're degreasing it, getting that stuff off. And you want to lube your chain every 2 to 3 rides, especially if you're getting some higher kilometers of like 40k plus. Just be mindful of that. You don't want to lube just before you head out on the ride. The reason being is if your bike is nice and fresh and you've got this fresh lube on, all that dirt that you're kicking up as you're biking is going to stick to your chain and just causes a lot of gunk to accumulate. So try to lube your bike the night before if you remember, if you've got a morning ride. Secondly, hose off if possible after every ride. That's not accessible to everybody. A lot of folks live in apartments, they don't have access to that. But if you can, it's a great way to just kind of maintain the integrity of the bike. Number 3, which is especially important, especially if you start putting more expensive wheels on your bike, is riding at the proper PSI, which is your air pressure. Obviously, that is dependent on your weight, but I also say that your terrain has a massive influence on it. If I'm going out, especially for other folks who might be living in colder climates, the roads haven't been swept yet, and so they're a little bit dirty, and I like to ride at a lower PSI because there's less chance of a puncture if the tire is a little bit more give. If I'm on more rough terrain, I'll also ride at a lower PSI. If I'm in a race and I've got a super flat terrain in front of me, I'm cranking it up. And again, this part's blocked here, but it just says to keep dry, kind of standard. Here are things that are really easy switches in your bike, so you don't need to worry about if you go and check out a bike and these are some of the components you're like, wow, these are so worn out. That's fine, because partially these are regular things to happen. It's like having an oil change or doing window washer fluid in a car. It's stuff that you would expect to go. Brakes as well is another part I would put here. Replacing brakes is not a big deal, brake pads and such. So first is your seat. I recommend just getting your own. This is especially beneficial if you're 70.3 or an Ironman athlete, you're spending a lot of time on the bike. Just get your custom seat. They're not too expensive, about $150 will get you a great one. If you're a girl, I highly recommend this as well. Big studies behind that. 2, tires. So regular wear and tear. If you go, the tires don't look great, I recommend just getting your own tires anyway, because you have a different maybe place of riding or style of riding. I personally use Gator Skins. You lose a little bit of watts when you're racing, but they have never punctured. They're really stable. I love them. So again, tires are just something you're gonna have to replace out anyways. Third is the chain. It's a super easy fix. It's nice to keep it sharp anyways. I find a big difference when I first switch my chain, so I recommend just changing it anyways. And pedals. Most bikes, especially road bikes, are not going to come with pedals, so that's kind of a normal thing, just so you know. It's like kind of an industry practice. I do recommend getting clips. I think they make the biggest difference. Yes, you're going to fall, so maybe don't buy a flippin' nice bike when you're first trying pedals for that exact reason. But yeah, I do think that clip pedals are so worth it. Now finally, a big question that I am asked all the time is if I think that a triathlon bike is worth it. This is 100% dependent on a few things. So one, can you afford 2 bikes? Because personally, I wouldn't want the triathlon bike to be my only option. 2 is, what's your race course like? Is it relatively flat? Is it not technical? Because if it is hilly and it is technical, the triathlon bike is not going to perform any better. It might even perform worse than a road bike that's made for those conditions. And then I would get it if I was going for time, because it does save a little bit of time, but let's get honest about that. I mean, you can like shave your legs and probably save a similar amount of time. You can probably lose 2 pounds and save a similar amount of time. So just be cautious that like you're not buying that much more for how much more expensive it can be, or also just needing to upgrade and buy a whole new bike altogether. Cons here that you can't see, not as comfortable. So personally, unless you're in a high-end tri bike, I do find them a lot less comfortable than regular road bikes. If you want to ride with a group, if there's a group ride in your community, which is pretty common now, you cannot take tri-bikes into a cycling club. And finally, they are hard to maneuver. So if you live in a really technical place, or even in an urban city where there's a lot of stoplights, you're not going to have the opportunity to get into those aero bars and hold them and actually get that aerodynamic benefit. And then I say, if you can't train in that position, it's very unlikely that you're going to be able to race in that position, because you're just not going to be used to it. It's going to be a lot of pressure on your neck and your back, and it's not going to be super pleasant. So yes or no, kind of depends on your own unique situation. Now let's talk gear. So I live by what I call the ABCDs. So essentially it's about accessibility, the bank of it, the comfort of it, and the durability of it. So my first question I ask myself is like, does this allow me to train more or easier? Because let's be honest, triathlon training takes a ton of time. So this is where I would, say yes to things like a smart trainer. I live in a cold climate. It's essential to be able to get my winter training in. I also, train myself. So having the smartwatch really enables me. I use Garmin to be able to get all the data that I need to make my training plans. I do have access to a treadmill. If I didn't, I would certainly purchase one, but that would be my recommendation. So secondly is bank. So you're going to be sold so many things in triathlon. You're going to be told so many things are essential, and you're going to have a huge list of things to buy. So my first question is, does this take away from other essentials that I actually need? And do I need this now? There's going to be so many things you want to purchase, but you might not need them all right now. So where I would go cheap is like Amazon goggles. Like I've always gone cheap with goggles, even swimsuits. And Amazon cycling shoes. I got those for super cheap. And let me just say this loud and clear: don't buy a tri bike. You're gonna want to because they look cool. And then you're gonna do a race and you're gonna collect like 35 of them and wonder why you ever spent a dime on it. So I very much encourage you not to do that, but you do. Comfort. So I always look at if something is removing friction to my training and how often am I actually going to be using it. For that reason, I spend a lot of time on my bike, especially indoors where there's not a lot of movement. So a comfortable bike seat is critical for me, which also includes comfortable bike shorts. I invest a lot of money into my shoes as well, into my runners. I'm very specific about what I like to run in, so I'll spend a ton of money in there. And the other thing with comfort is also like, is it helping your body recover? If you're running in worn out run shoes, well, that's going to do some damage to your knees. It's not going to feel super pleasant. So personally, that's another area I would automatically invest in. And then durable, is it, am I going to use this for years to come, or do I need this to last forever? Do I even need this to last forever? Tri-suits? No, you wear them a few times a year, so it's okay if they're not the highest quality. Same with a wetsuit. I had to tear my wetsuit pretty quick, and I didn't mind because I spent like $100 on it, and I was like, well, I'll only race in this every so often. I typically don't use it when I'm training anyways. But I will say carbon bike I would invest in personally because you can add so many components to your carbon bike. It's really hard to resell bikes at the same value. And so carbon just gives you this awesome frame to be able to build on and add to. And obviously, as someone who's been hit by a truck, get a good helmet, like 1000%. Okay, moving into how all this might add up for you. If I had to make a rough budget for you. So I would say a great bike, this is Canadian dollars. I would, look at about $650 to get a pretty standard bike. Obviously the helmet needs to be included in there somewhere. So that's about $100, let's say. You've got a watch, which I highly recommend. I use Garmin, not even sponsored by them, just think they're amazing. $300 would get you a good one that you can use in the water as well, which is a really important thing. Wetsuits, I personally find Xterra really, really cheap. Blue 70 is my favorite brand, but they're really expensive. But a wetsuit you can get for about $150. And again, I would get a cheaper one just till you start, know what you like, know what you don't. And then bike shorts for about $75. You can get a pretty good bib. I do recommend the bib. It's the ones with like the suspenders kind of style to them. I just think they're more comfortable. They stay on, they fit better. And then a coach. I recommend anyone who is trying to do triathlon to get a coach, even for a small period, 3 months maybe. It just sets you up. You won't realize how much less you have to do to get great results if you have a coach. So I would budget anything from $100 to $350 for a coach, for a beginner coach. Obviously, if you want more curated training, which is kind of what I receive as an athlete, if you're looking at a much higher budget. A few things that are totally non-essential, in my opinion: a fancy tri-suit, a bike computer, heart rate monitors, compression socks, aero helmets. Behind me here is a triathlon bike. I don't feel like it's essential. And again, these are all nice things to have, and with time, 100% invest in them, or if you have the means, buy them now, for sure. But you can do a triathlon without these things, which I know just needs to be said because so many people get a little intimidated by the price tag of triathlon. Don't get into it. Carbon plated shoes, super not essential. Smart goggles, not essential. Gels and mixes, let me clarify, if you're in a race, they are definitely convenient. You don't have to train with them. Dates, dried fruits, bananas, all those things also are a great source of fuel while you're out training, much more affordable. And finally, aero bars. I know some people stick with the road bike, they put a set of aero bars on it. I personally have never enjoyed it because the bike is not set up for aero bars, and so you're not getting a ton of the aerodynamics. All you're getting is being crouched forward, but even then, you're not moving in the same way as you do with the tri bike. So I personally don't find them beneficial. Again, that is 100% my 2 cents. Now let's talk quickly about basic swim techniques, because the swim is definitely the hardest for everyone unless you're a competitive swimmer. Huge advantage. So first things first is get in that open water as quickly as you can, and just be cautious of where you're taking your swim advice with that, because open water swimming is not lane swimming, and sometimes I felt like I was getting instructions from swim specific coaches that hadn't swam open water, and they were emphasizing things like even my kickoff from the wall, and I was like, that's super not relevant to what I'm training for. So that was a little bit frustrating. So get in the open water. It's a totally different set of skills. 2, which kind of aligns with that, is practice in your wetsuit. Even if you don't have access to open water, or it's going to be super cold before your triathlon because you're going south, get in the pool and use your wetsuit. And you might feel stupid, and you probably will look stupid, but that's okay because everyone who knows what you're doing there will think you're super cool. If I saw you in the pool in your wetsuit, I'd give you a thumbs up. Finally is like more often and more intention is so much better than just sitting in the pool 2 times a week for like an hour and just busting yourself. So it's much more useful to go in, know exactly what you're going to work on, which leads to my next point, which is focus on technique, not speed. I tell my athletes this all the time. I'm like, swim training is like learning an instrument. You're trying to master a skill. You're trying to get a good technique. You're not trying to get in a workout. You're going to have plenty of time to get your heart rate up, to get your muscles sore, and the spike in the run. Let this be your time to just meditate, to come into technique, to slow things down. And my final tip here is, especially if you can't get in open water and you can't team train with people, swim when it's busiest at the pool. It's really difficult when you have only swam in a lane all by yourself in these perfect conditions where you can see everything and it's super nice. There's no water in your face, and then you come into a triathlon where it's like a washing machine of people. You've got feet, you've got hands, you've got elbows. That can be really overwhelming. So set yourself up for success. It's also why I say the wetsuit, that extra pressure on your chest when you're already feeling panicky in the water. If you don't have exposure to that before your triathlon, can be a little bit scary. So highly recommend. All right, moving into this last section here about nutrition. So I only have 2 rules about nutrition that I find work for every athlete. 1 is there's no race day experiments, it's just a hard rule. If you haven't trained with it, you don't get to try it. I am the queen of thinking this rule is optional and paying a significant price of it. Don't do that. So if you haven't trained with it, don't use it on your race. And finally, if it works for you, it works. I've worked with some amazing dietitians in my athletic career. At the end of the day, I was like, I should have just listened to my gut, because I can have all the best advice, and maybe having some knowledge of macros was very helpful for sure for kind of guiding into what I should be using. But at the end of the day, it worked for me, so it worked and I used it. As a general rule of thumb, you're going to want between 60 and 90 grams of carbs per hour while you're racing, but I emphasize as you're training too. So if you're heading out for that 2-hour ride on your bike, practice with fuel, because if you don't practice with fuel and you try to do that on your race day, it's going to really suck. These are some of my favorite options. I am celiac, so some of them I can't use, but I highly recommend a variety of foods. And again, you can stay away from the really expensive gels and mixes by just using some of these natural foods here. A little tip I have at the top there is mixing glucose with fructose to help absorb the carbs. Too much of one can really upset your stomach. And that, folks, is what we have. I just want to make you aware of what I do as a coach to make triathlon more affordable for folks everywhere. So I run The Collected. This is a $99 a month program. We have curated training, weekly group calls, unlimited text communication, and, as you might expect, one awesome team. So if you're looking for a really affordable way to get into triathlon, to access knowledge like this, it's really clearly presented, have a coach in your corner, be able to talk and ask any questions that you have for them every single week, let me know. You can drop any of your comments or questions down below. My email is sav.wilds@gmail.com. You can follow me on Instagram, or you can connect with us directly at the website to sign up and get your free consultation today. All right, good luck. Hope to see you out there.